Hi, my name is Thomas from thomasyoungauthor.com. I launched my website a couple of weeks ago and I started putting up some text on there. And last week I published my third essay in my collection. It's called Deconstructing Pride. My latest essay is called The Sentimental Exhibitionist. And it's about a phenomenon called the gay influencer. And in the essay, I'm going to talk a little bit about that, what I find problematic about that phenomenon, and what that phenomenon says about, gay culture, about the gay identity at large. 3 weeks before that, I published another essay. It's called Professional Gays. And it's about, a certain type of gay people. A type that thinks of himself and presents himself to the world as this, not only an activist, but also a spokesperson for all homosexuals or for all gay people who have adopted the gay identity. So he's the one who claims to look after, the interests of gay people. And in the gay world, or they have, well, I wouldn't say a bad name, but they have always been somewhat controversial, because on the one hand, I think they are needed because there are certain issues that need addressing or that need representation. But speaking on behalf of all gay people, all homosexuals, is presumptuous, because what can you say about them? But it's not only presumptuous. There's also a sinister side to these people, and I'm trying to explore where that side shows itself and what it consists of. My first essay, and it was called Homosexuals and Gays, and that is, well, you can read it as an introductory text to the collection Deconstructing Pride. And it more or less argues for keeping certain things separate, or seeing things as separate things. And the main thing I want to keep separate is the separation, or the distinction, between homosexuality as a sexual reality and the gay identity, because these things were never the same and should never be the same. But I think part of modern gay activism is about making that distinction disappear. And you can tell because I think Pride Month is coming up, or it has already started. And yesterday I went to the gym. I had to take the train, and all the panels at the train station were put in the colors of the rainbow flag. And well, I wouldn't say I wasn't annoyed by it, because I'm used to it by now, but I find it a little strange, because the rainbow flags now hangs off government buildings. You can see it in schools, and I do have some problems with that, because one of the things that flag stands for is that now basically every homosexual teenager has to adopt the gay identity. It is not only enough that it's not only sufficient that he accepts his sexuality, but implicitly, and that is represented by the flag, they ought to adopt the gay identity, or what they now call the queer identity, which in my essay Homosexuals and Gay say basically means the same thing. Queer just basically means the gay identity for more people, even people who are not homosexuals, the what you call the gender non-conforming people. But yeah, so I have a problem with that. So I want to keep the sexuality and the identity separate. I want to illustrate that point with a story I didn't tell in the essay, but which tells you something about me and about how I saw my sexuality and who my circle of friends consisted of when I was young. So my circle of friends mainly consisted of people who were basically loners. And we usually found each other through dating websites, through the internet. And this was in the age before, dating apps, before that became a big thing. But we were able to find each other there. And it's also a little too much. They were more like acquaintances, or we formed a sort of a network of people who saw themselves as loners and outsiders, who didn't have many friends, but also didn't really want to have them. Were of a certain personality that, the sort of the loner personality that don't really want friends or have, very difficulty relating to other people, who feel sort of a little otherworldly, who felt a little, separate from the rest of the world. And but strangely enough, we got to know each other, and this was, I don't know, I would call like a network of, well, not everybody knew each other, but later I found out that that some people, a friend of mine knew some friends of another friend of his, so that there was this sort of loner network going on. And we knew each other not so much through talking or going out, but through like engaging in in promiscuous sex, often drug induced promiscuous sex, when we from a very early age. And since I've been writing on this subject, I started thinking a lot about these friends and how we viewed our homosexuality. And yeah, because our homosexuality was not sort of central to who we were. Like, it was one element in a sort of larger, outside identity. But it felt as a natural thing. It was not, something we saw as a problem or something to overcome. No, from a very early age, we all saw it as something normal, something we experimented with even as young teenagers, and we never felt bad about or never saw as problematic. It felt good, and we engaged in it, and that was it. And when I think back of them, I mean, we never even used the word gay or homosexual or the equivalent of those words in this country. We never did. I mean, this was not an issue for us, speaking of these things. We didn't have the need to name things. It was a natural thing. And also in doing my research, in writing these essays, I also realized people like us, must have always existed. Even before, the sort of supposed major historical events, the Stonewall riots and all the pride parades and all the activism. And these people must have always been there. And sort of when we were teenagers, there was also this series, this very popular and very good series called The Wire. And in that, there was this very interesting gay character. His name was guy named Omar Little, and he was sort of a ripper. So he ripped large quantities of drugs from other drug dealers to make money. But he was also this outsider. He was alone, and yeah, he has sort of this sort of cowboy-like aura around him. Although he was black and he was part of that sort of black criminal culture, but he had that about him. But he was an outsider. He was always alone, and he was a homosexual. He had relationships, sexual relationships with other boys. And one of the major threats in the series is that the drug dealers where he steals from so killed his boyfriend, like in a very gruesome way. And although me and my friends, we were not criminals, but we were exactly like him. We were loners, and we didn't see we saw our homosexuality just as one element of that. We never went around saying, oh, we are gay or we are homosexuals. This was not something, we didn't thought of our homosexuality in that way. So we were also the kind of people who would, even though we were really relaxed about our sexuality and we were at ease about it and we saw it as this natural thing, we also never had sort of this, what the identity people like to call, the coming out. This is always, especially on the internet with my coming out story, it is presented as if it is this major event in a person's life. So, where this sort of almost religious awakening, where you finally accept your sexuality and accept the gay identity in your life, and in a very strange way, you became your authentic self. I mean, your authentic self. I mean, me and my friends. I mean, yes, we had to make our sexuality known to the people around us, but for us, that wasn't such an important thing. It wasn't a major event. I mean, we were the same person before, and we're the same person after. We engaged in homosexual acts before that, and we engaged in homosexual acts after that. And also, when I was a young teenager, I even had, sexual relations with people who later had like a girlfriend, or who got married, had children, for whom that sexuality also wasn't the problem, and were later also open about that to the world around them and to their wives and to. So this was a natural thing for them, and not a matter of identity. And what I find so strange is that, strange, what I notice is that for people who always had a sort of relaxed attitude about their sexuality, even homosexuality, for them, the identity is not that important, strangely enough. And for those who did have an issue with their sexuality, often even into adulthood, and then later in life adopt, the identity. I mean, the identity seems tailor-made for such people. And that I find a little weird, because when I hear a lot of, especially the discourse and in popular media and on internet, I find it strange that people who had issues with their sexuality, who thought it was this sort of, major signifier, this important thing they had to overcome, whatever, now get to tell me and my friends who never had any issues with their sexuality, how we have to think about our homosexuality, and we also have to adopt that gay identity, because that is that has to be done basically by all homosexual. And I think that is, in a way, the world turned upside down. My friends and I also weren't the kind of people who, for example, would ever marry a person of the same sex, although we felt at ease about our sexuality. And I think, why is that? And it's not so much even about sex, but the way we relate to men and the way we view our homosexuality. We were the kind of gay guys who would think, well, if if I wanted to get married, I can also, I would, you know, I can have relations with a woman. Why we cannot grasp why someone, would marry a man. I mean, when I see pictures of two men getting married, it's not that I say, or it must be forbidden or it's wrong or anything else. I mean, I do think they they genuinely feel it's important to them, and they genuinely feel this sort of romantic and sacred bond between the two, and they associate that with marriage, and not only in the legal sense but also in the sort of spiritual sense apparently. But that's not how we view our homosexuality. So in this you can see that the way we see our homosexuality and the way we relate to other men can be very different. And I say this in the essay that, homosexuality is not a collective experience. For us, homosexuality was one element, it's just a tiny element in a whole, lifestyle, in a whole identity that was much more than having sex with people of the same sex. For other people, it is, sort of very, very important. It is sexuality, but also that identity is very central to their lives. And then other people, so yeah, that also makes me believe that this distinction between homosexuality and being, or the gay identity, have to be separate. Now, another distinction I have to make is that, being gay, what people call being gay, is not the same as the gay identity. You see, being gay or refer to a certain set of, or a certain sensibility, or a certain set of attributes homosexuality historically had. And we all know what they had. But these are the things that make them stand out and make them, for example, different from a lot of heterosexual men or from people at large. But even these gay attributes, personality traits, I want to call them, they can also, and this is also a point I make in the essay, they can also be carried by, heterosexual women, or by heterosexual people, even women. Because, the other day, a neighbor of mine, which is, an 85-year-old woman, she said she was a little upset with someone, and she made like a snarky comment, and she said, "I don't want to have what other people have." And I thought, well, that's a very gay thing to say. But, today's gay culture, the gay identity, is not like that. It's not like these personalities. It sort of automatically assumes that gay people, of homosexuals, have this sort of these special attributes and something that makes them special and stand out, and that's sort of that's part of that sexuality, and that sort of is there, that personality is what makes them gay. But I don't believe that, because the culture, the gay culture, I mean, because now every homosexual had to become part of the gay world, and the gay identity had to come out of the closet, to use one of those horrible phrases the identity people use. Is that it hasn't done the culture any good. It has made the culture conformist, even more, I don't know, narrow-minded, as it already was, even more vulgar in a way even. And in the essay I also make the point that the gay world is becoming, in a way, less and less gay. And some people even sense that, especially the people that now want to start using the word queer, because the queer umbrella wants to save these sort of things that make them stand out. And when I was thinking about, the word queer and LGBTQ and stuff like that, I was thinking, me and my friends, what they would call us also kind of, we formed kind of this subculture, but it's sort of, and now you would say, oh, that was a queer subculture, and in a way we were living an alternative lifestyle in which our homosexuality was only this sort of minor, but sort of very sort of self-evident part. And I think when I read about these things, I mean, these people have always existed, but we would never ever have called ourselves queer or be labeled in such a way. Yeah. So that was it for today. Thank you.